now you have to understand how all these concepts are interrelated. First, I will disintegrate this complete concepts into different layers, such as layer 1, that is climate science, what makes it happen. Students, greenhouse effect, global warming, atmospheric window, ozone depletion and changes in the cryosphere. This leads to layer 2, which is effect of climate change. These are the physical changes such as temperature rise, sea level rise, change in the water cycle, extreme events, ecosystem disruption. And this converts layer 3, that is vulnerability. Who and how does it affect? Vulnerability is further divided into 3 aspects: physical vulnerability such as coasts, drought zones, etc. Economic vulnerability, who are the people who are affected such as farmers, migrant laborers, and then third is the social vulnerability. This is like poor or female, marginalized group, food security risk, health risk. These are the impacts which are measured by GIS, livelihood vulnerability index, hazards mapping. So the question is, what is needed? And this constitutes the 4th level, that is the governance response. The United Nations Framework on Climate Change, Adaptation and COP, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, climate justice, climate finance, Green Climate Fund and carbon trading all are example of the response. So if we put all these into action, that will give the layer 4, because through that only we are going to achieve the goal of how we are dealing with such impacts, and this is known as adaptation and resilience. So this is layer 5. In this we discuss about early warning system, climate resilient agriculture, urban heat mitigation, water management, indigenous knowledge, disaster risk reduction and the concept of net zero strategies. What is the impact? This results into development that is sustainable and strong, such as Sustainable Development Goal of 13, which talks about resource sustainability, reduced vulnerability, long-term adaptive capacity. So this was a model which explained how all this fits together. Climate science explains why change is happening. Impacts shows what is changing in nature. Vulnerability explains who suffers and why. Governance tells us who is in charge and how to take action. Adaptation shows us what we need to do to survive and thrive. It is a round system, it's a holistic approach. If adaptation is not strong, vulnerability goes up, impacts get worse and pressure on governance goes up. If adaptation is strong, vulnerability goes down, resilience goes up and sustainable development becomes possible. So I hope you are now able to understand the integrated climate change vulnerability adaptation model, which I can say is ICVAM model. It's a framework of this entire course which has interrelated science with its effect, its weakness. The outcome is how to manage it in form of management, and in management we talk about adaptation. Once we are strong in governance, we become the strength. So in nutshell, I would like to say that a brief look at this entire course in form of a model describes climate change as a system that connects atmospheric science, environmental effects, socio-economic vulnerability, governance structure and ways to adapt. It shows how integrated policy and long-term development planning can help people become more resilient. Domain 1, which talks about the climate drivers. These are the forcing factor. These factors are further disintegrated into natural forces such as change in solar radiation, volcanic eruption, changes in the orbit. which is also known as Milankovitch cycle. The second is drivers that are caused by people, which is known as anthropogenic forces such as burning fossil fuel, cutting down trees, emissions from factories, urbanization and the heat islands effect, methane emission from farming. So what is the key understanding of this entire course is that climate has natural causes, but most of the time people are the one who causes climate change. Because of this, the second domain comes, that is how the climate system reacts. It reacts in form of greenhouse effect, higher global temperature, changes in the atmosphere window, ozone interaction, warming of the ocean, melting of the cryosphere in form of melting of glaciers, ice sheets and permafrost. Besides that, how the hydrological cycle gets changed. The key understanding is these processes upset the balance of the energy on the earth and start big changes in the environment. Because of which the third domain comes in the picture, that is effects on the physical and sectoral levels. The first is effect on the body in form of rising sea level, extreme weather events such as cyclone, drought, heat waves, glacial melting. The second one is effect on the environment, that is at macro level such as loss of biodiversity, coral bleaching, damage to the forest. And the third is effects on different sectors, such as primary sector is agriculture, fisheries, forestry. Secondary sector is related to infrastructure damage, industrial risk, and the tertiary sector such as tourism loss, insurance burden and service disruption. So what is your key understanding from this? Climate change affect not only the environment but the economy and the society. And because of this, domain 4 comes into picture, that is the structure of vulnerability. Different kinds of vulnerability such as physical vulnerability, social vulnerability and economic vulnerability. You need to understand vulnerability formula, which says about the exposure which is integrated with sensitivity and in which there is a reduction in the ability to adapt. Tools for such measurement, as I described earlier, also are different, such as livelihood vulnerability index, GIS hazards, vulnerability and adaptation assessments. What you should know, that is impacts are not the same for everyone. How vulnerable someone is depends on their socio-economic and the geographic situation. And this constitutes the domain 5, which is related to the governance and policy response. Governance on a global scale such as Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, COP summits, the UNFCCC. These talks about the justice for the climate, responsibilities that are the same but different, fairness in cutting emissions, funds for climate in form of carbon trading, adaptation fund, green climate funds. This gives a framework for the whole country. For example, in India, we have adopted the international plannings in form of National Action Plan on Climate Change, State Action Plan on Climate Change, National Adaptation Plans. What you need to understand from this regulation part is governance transforms scientific understanding into structured policy and financial mechanism, which further leads to construction of domain 6, that is related to adaptation and resilience. What we are talking in this? Adaptation of a structure, for example, walls along the sea, systems for controlling floods, green infrastructure in cities. Adaptation based on ecosystem, for example, repairing mangroves or managing watersheds. Adaptation based on the community, such as indigenous knowledge system, agriculture that handle climate change, conservation mechanism and strategic part, such as zero emissions, which talks about the SDG 13 climate action goal and sustainable resource management. What you have to understand from adaptation strategies is adaptation makes people more adaptable and less vulnerable in future. Because of this, the next domain is constituted, and that is the final result of climate resilience and sustainable growth. Lower risk of disaster, better ability to adapt, sustainable use of resources, security of food and water, and fairness between generations. I can say that climate drivers that lead to change in the climate system and that led to effect on people and business, making people more vulnerable. That led to response from the governance and finance, and then we try to find out the ways to adopt, and this gives birth to climate resilience. So at the summary of this lecture, which is actually covering each and every concept of this course, climate change is a scientifically confirmed occurrence primarily induced by human action. It has an effect on the atmosphere, the sea level, the water cycle, the ecosystem, economy, and people's health. Vulnerability is not the same for everyone. It depends on how exposed, sensitive, and adaptable someone is. The UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement all are examples of global governance framework that help with adaptation and mitigation efforts. The national framework such as NAPCC and SAPCC incorporate climate action into development initiatives. To build resilience, you need early warning system, sustainable resource management, climate resilient agriculture, the strategies for adapting to urban life, and the use of indigenous knowledge. Climate justice and climate finance are necessary to make sure that the world's responses are fair and work well.